Okay, so talking of wisdom literature and what it's going to do to help us, wisdom literature it gives us the opportunity to gain more and more of it, right? You know, the longer you live, the more you can layer onto what you have, okay? Proverbs chapter 3, verses 19 through 20 talks about just wisdom is gaining insight into the way things really are, the way the world works. By the way, sometimes the world is working the way it ought to, and of course sometimes it's not working the way it ought to. That's part of the sin effects in our world. But the point is we learn by looking. And you know this phrase, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? In other words, the healthiest place to start is with realizing it's the Creator who wove certain things into the fabric of the creation. So in looking at the texture of the fabric, you could work backward, okay, and be able to see what's going on in the mind of the Creator. I'd like to tell you a little story that gets to this. I only tell stories about my kids that are positive stories. I promise. Some pastors who said this yesterday, pastors should never be telling stories that embarrass their children. I don't do that. But here's an interesting little story. When my kids were fairly little, their ages were roughly 3, 5, 7, 9, something like that. They were doing a home project with their mother, and she held up, or put up on the desk, a picture of a dinosaur. And she gave each of the kids a piece of paper and some pens, some color pencils and so forth. And she said, why don't you make your version of this picture of a dinosaur? Now, every kid loves dinosaurs. I still love dinosaurs, right? And so the kids went to work in different colors. When I came home that day, she said to me, I'm going to show you a picture drawn by one of your kids. Let's see if you really know your kids and can tell which child did which picture. And by the way, I passed the test. So she first holds up a picture, and in this case, the one kid who'd done this picture didn't use color pens or pencils, only used a fine point pencil, no color. And the picture of the dinosaur had angles and precision. It was almost mechanical, all right? And I said, that's got to be Nathan. And it was. Nathan is my oldest. Nathan is the one who, he is now a computer systems engineer, okay? This is his mind. It's always been his mind. Now that's his work. So by looking at the texture of the work, I could read backward into the personality of the child. The next picture was filled with color. Not only did the dinosaur look colorful and exciting, there were flowers that had been woven into the picture, and butterflies and birds and happiness just jumping off the page. I said, that's John. And the daughter, very, very creative, likes to make stories, very imaginative, and sure enough, that was her picture. The next picture was color, but the dinosaur in this picture was even more scary than the original picture. You know, the teeth were bigger, the claws were bigger. It was almost like an angry dinosaur. I said, that's definitely Benjamin. He's the one kid who loves to pick up snakes and yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah, the one who was, I think I told you, was put in the hospital once because he got bitten by a poisonous snake, that kind of stuff. And that's the stuff that he enjoys. He loves that kind of stuff. So you could see in the way they have been drawing what the personality was of the child. We're doing the same thing with the fabric of the creation and the way the world works. And we're trying to see it when the world works well, all right? And say that's because God designed it. The personality of God is going into the design, right? So the more we get acquainted with the design, this is what wisdom literature says, the more you look in the way and see it works, you not only get to know God, but then you also get to realize if God made this world and made the world in and by wisdom, then there's a lot to be learned from observation. I don't know, do you have the expression beating a dead horse? Have you ever heard that expression? It's like when someone wants to make a point and they keep on like making the point. I'm going to beat a dead horse here. Many people want to put the Word of God sort of against the worldly wisdom, or worldly wisdom against the Word of God. And that can happen, but it doesn't need to happen. We want to look at where these things come together and work cooperatively and train us. And I think the wisdom literature allows us to. Let me talk some things about the wisdom literature. And I'm going to get even more specific in terms of pastoral counseling. The wisdom literature helps us recognize our limitations, right? And it's one thing to know your limitations in your mind, okay? And still another to have them really built into your heart. Many of us, and I'm guilty, I'm holding myself as a bad example of this. Many of us try to exceed what really realistically sometimes are our limitations. Right? And the limitations of strength, the limitations of durability, and limitations of skills. I want to emphasize the skills God gives, but I also need to know, and pastors need to know, that God has not only given us gifts galore, but also no one person is the answer to everything. We've been talking about that. And pastors, and I've had a hard time realizing this, and I think maybe some of you as well. The Proverbs urge humility, don't they? You all know this. There's so many Proverbs, so many parts of the Bible that say it's important to be humble. It's important to be teachable. If you're humble, you are teachable. If you're not humble, you'll be difficult to teach, I'm afraid. So to teach humility and openness to the things that we really need to take in. And the wisdom literature is all about, it talks about a listening heart, right? You know, it's very much inclined to approach situations saying, I have something to learn and to gain. By the way, just so you know, when I come to Kenya, as I've often come, I like to bring whatever insight I can give, but I want you to know something, because this is true, you just won't see it. I go back home and I tell stories about you people, okay? I'm serious. I tell stories about the conversations we have, about the experiences we have, about the ways in which you do certain things that may be different. I tell stories about you because I want to take back with me ideas that are best embodied in your culture and in your person. So that's you don't get to see it because you know this happens back in my home. But please know I take these kinds of things. I love the idea of being a listening person. I try to listen better. I need practice. I try to listen better and be teachable. So bringing the wisdom literature together in general before I then focus this, okay? Anywhere there's God's truth, people of all kinds can see it. It's not just Christians who see God's truth. Many other people may see God's truth but not be willing to admit it's God's truth, but they're still seeing it. That's good news, because if God made the world, then of course his fingerprints are going to be all over it. Wisdom is experiential and observational. It encourages us to keep learning, keep trying. It is deeply ethical. You realize this. There's a lot in the wisdom literature that says how you treat your fellow man, your fellow woman, okay, goes to what's going on inside your soul. All right? Let me put it another way, and I'm actually going to quote a rather famous person who's been very interesting fellow. His name is Jordan Peterson. There's a lot of videos out on a whole variety of topics. Interesting man. I won't talk about him per se, but Jordan Peterson made this observation in one of his blogs the other day. He said, listen, he says, if you want to know what's the evidence of a good person, it's not how they treat people out there. It's how do they treat people inside their own household. All right? It's fairly easy to be kind to people out there. We see them for just a few minutes. We put on a good show. It's easy. But how do I deal with the people who are my domestic companions? That's where the real test of a man is, and of a woman. What is that person doing within their own house? When nobody outside is looking, but they've got those people inside, face to face with them. That's the key. That's how you get to know yourself. You just simply ask yourself, what do I see of myself in terms of my interactions with my husband or my wife, my parents? Some of you perhaps live with or near your parents, your children, and so forth. All right? And the wisdom literature is spending a lot of time doing, by the way, what Jesus also said, right? What are the two greatest commandments? First one is easy, right? Love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind, with all your strength. And the second is like it, he said. That's it. So, and our neighbors include our own family, first of all, and then the others. So, and when we find we have come short, we go to 1 John, we confess what we need, and ask forgiveness, right? And then we press forward. That's the way to go. So wisdom literature wrestles with major issues through life. I'm going to talk about one of them in just a minute, because this touches for all of us the experience of deep pain, sadness, and suffering. We're going to come to that in just a few minutes here. So, what happens else? What else can we say about the wisdom literature? Jesus is a wisdom literature person. Yes, he's often talking the law of God. Absolutely. But he's also very much interested in the ethics as people deal with people. So Jesus is a wisdom literature type of person, right? Talking about the ethics of life. At the same time, he's interested in what is God's law want of us. He's holistic. It's all coming together in the life and the ministry of Jesus. And just mentioned briefly, but I won't dwell on it. The New Testament wisdom book is clearly the book of James, but we can explore that further another time. Now, here's what I want to do next. I'm still in the zone of wisdom literature, but I'm going to just expand slightly to the side of it. And I want to talk about a subject which is it's a big area. And it's an area where, frankly, much of pastoral counseling is going to come about, okay? And it has to do with the fact that sometimes when the world is very badly broken, and when our circumstances are badly broken, we're badly broken, and things are awful, that's often where we will meet God most honestly. Here's the topic. It's a fancy word, and I've discovered generally most people don't know the word. I don't care what society they live in. So I want to put it up here and I want to define it. The word is theodicy. 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 Okay? I'm going to talk about this for a while because this is something that has to come in to pastoral counseling. And by the way, after I've given you this section, I'm going to ask a question of all of you. I'll get to that when we get to that. Let me break down the word. I know you know the first half of it. You can see that word that is based on the Greek word for God, theos. Okay? It's the question of what's going on down here. It's from a Greek piece of a word that we usually would just put as dik, okay, D-I-K. And there's various words based on this lemma, this stem piece, dik, which has to do with justification and righteousness and justice. Okay? So we're basically taking Greek words and then creating new words out of them and bringing them into our language is what we do. Okay. So, what's the question? What do we mean by the theodicy of God? I'm going to give you two definitions. They're both true and they have to work together. Okay? So definition number one, hear me out here. It is what we would call the issue of the justification of God. Notice this. We usually talk about the justification of people by God. All right? But this is going to turn the tables. Boldly, I want to do it respectfully. But boldly, it's basically saying, but wait a minute. If God is truly a morally whole, pure, and good God, then where does evil come from? Well, if God made everything, then and we know God would make things good, right? Genesis 1 tells us that. He made everything, and he calls it good, 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 good. Repeating that phrase. Where does evil come from? Because God makes everything. The implication is, I don't agree with this, but the implication could be someone could say, well, it seems like God created evil also, right? I'm going to come back to that. Bear with me. I'm going to come back to that. But that's why we have this bold term, the justification of God. Listen, listen. I have heard this many times. You have to have heard this. If people are being honest, all right, and something horrible has broken in their lives, some terrible tragedy has happened to themselves, their spouse, their kids, their whoever, all right, and it's blinding in its horrific nature, whatever the horrible event was, and somewhere inside is trying to say, how can a good God allow this? It seems impossible. We're just observing for now, okay? So that's why the term, the justification of God. All right. Now, that means, and this is the second definition, and that they work together. They're not fighting with each other. They work together. All right. It means we're getting at a doctrine of suffering, which is kind of a rough way to talk about a doctrine. It's the doctrine of suffering. Other things sound more positive, like the study of God, or the study of the Holy Spirit, or the study of the church, or whatever else. Those sound like more positive topics, right? The study of suffering, the doctrine of suffering. By the way, I want to recall a phrase I gave you yesterday. That's a good. I'm just going to tuck this in here. All right. The theology, okay, is what Saint Anselm called faith seeking understanding. I love that. He said that 900 years ago. Faith seeking understanding. That's what theology is. Sometimes I have young adults say to me, they don't want to get into theology. And I say, oh, you already have. You already have theological ideas. You already have ideas about God. You cannot be non-theological. You already have ideas about what God is like. Everybody does. All right? So we're all theologians. We're all wrestling with life in the world. Okay? So, the question is a good one. So, theodicy is the justification of God, or a doctrine of suffering. And I promise I don't do this, because I try not to talk indefinitely, but I could tell, and I bet you could tell, story after story after story after story, either of your own life, or of the lives of people in your church or friends or family, where things just went horribly wrong. And you're trying to make sense of it all, and you don't know what to do. And I want to encourage you that when you find yourself in those situations, not to come with quick answers. Okay? And also sometimes to leave certain questions unanswered. All right? So, for example, just to take one, it's one I've seen heard repeatedly. When a young couple that's having a child is so excited and something goes terribly wrong and the child dies. And the natural question is, why? Be careful. You don't know why. I don't know why. They don't know why. Why should I pretend I have an answer? I love to go back. Let me pause. We all know that the story of Job is the story of why, right? We all know the basic thing. Job is a wealthy man, an influential man, a good man, right? Not only is he good about how he relates to God, but he is even making sacrifices on behalf of his children in case they forget to respect God. This is a guy who has a great heart, all right? Really. And then everything falls apart because the devil is given a leash to do it. And I have to say, I've been asking myself this for a long time. Are these three friends really friends? I don't want friends like that, who will basically come and tell me, you did something wrong, confess it. Now maybe if I did something wrong, I should confess it. But he's saying, in all honesty, I didn't do anything wrong. Yes, you did. You must confess it. Because if you get to that, that's why this evil and this sadness took place. Listen, people, you, me, or anybody else, do have the thinking of those three friends sometimes. Now let me pause. I'm going to leave Job for 1 second and then come back to Job. Okay? I want to go over to an account of Jesus wandering through Jerusalem. You can read this in the Gospel of John. And he's with some of the apostles. And at a distance, they see a man who's begging. He's been born, he's a known character. He's been born blind, and he's begging. And before they get too close to him, one of the apostles, or maybe a couple of them, say to Jesus, who sinned, the man or his parents, in order that he should be born blind? Now, it's not a bad question, right? Sometimes people suffer because they did something wrong. A lot of people suffer because they did something wrong. All right? Dr. Strelli deals with people all the time who are suffering in prison, but they did something wrong. That's the reason they're there. That's a possibility.
Nope, they're all innocent. So they.
Oh, is that right? Thank you for the professional opinion. Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay, so it's possible. Number two. Could the parents have done something horrible and that caused? Yes, that is possible as well. Possible. All right. But Jesus, you remember his response. In this case, this particular case, we're going to look at this by God. What's his answer? Remember this? Who sinned, the parents or the man? Not exactly. Not the sin. And he gives a very broad kind of a statement. But it was so that the glory of God could be shown. That's a pretty. It answers and doesn't answer the question both. Okay? It gives somewhat of an answer, but it doesn't sew the whole package up. Now bring that with you and come back to Job. Thankfully, there's a fourth friend who comes to Job. Now, this guy, the fourth friend is the younger of the group. And he waits until the elders speak. He shows respect. The elders speak first, albeit they're mistaken. And I'm going to paraphrase what this fourth friend, I'm going to phrase it as a question, so to speak, that he gives to Job. Job, is it possible that you are too self-confident in your righteousness? Right? Like, good righteousness is good. The Bible says we want to have it. Right? Blessed are those who hunger for the kingdom of God. Righteousness is good. But one can be too confident. Oh, I've really attained it. I'm a truly spiritual person. That's dangerous. That's dangerous. And it's interesting, when God steps in, the very, very last part of Job, and starts to sort of, if you will, set things right, all right, he addresses the first three friends. Who is this that darkens counsel? Right? All right, push them to the side. And then in the spirit of the fourth friend, God says to Job, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? We all know the answer to that. Well, we weren't there. No, we weren't there. And that's a rhetorical way of saying there will be some things that there's much we get to understand, right? And there will be some things that we simply don't. We just don't. We don't, we can't, or we may not for a long time, maybe get some insight later on. All right? And this is helpful because it means in life there are some things that are black and white, and there's also a lot of things that are gray. I'm not saying the standards of God are gray. I'm saying our experience of the messiness of life is gray. That's what I'm saying. Some things are just hard to get. And the wisdom literature, especially, Job is a long, tedious read, but you should be left with an appreciation of the glory of God and ordaining everything he ordains, and then being able to say, but there's a lot I don't get. And that's important. Because while pastors are sought for answers and often can give answers, that's the good news, all right? We cannot possibly know everything. And there are times when we ought to be able to say, I don't know exactly. But here's what I do know, and one of these things is patience and faithfulness and humility. Those things I know we have to pursue. You know that. That's what we know and I need to pursue. So, let's start to talk about what we might call, maybe I can put this as a third sort of sub-piece here, exploring a little bit of the nature of suffering, okay, and bring in a close related question, okay? It's not the definition of theodicy, but it's one of the things you have to get into when you start to explore theodicy. And that is, how does sin relate to suffering? Okay? How? But what is the relationship between sin and suffering? Because as we've already said, we've already shown, there are many people who simply have this formula: if you suffer, it's because you sin. And by the way, that's why Jesus' words are helpful. No, that's not always the case. That's not always the case. But then what is the case? What do we do with various things? Let's start to explore that a little bit. There's a writer who wrote, I've gotten some very, very helpful material some years ago. A guy's fancy name, Cornelius Plantinga, wrote a book called It's Not the Way It's Supposed to Be. Good book. And in it he explores specifically sin and addiction. Now, you can be addicted to many things: substances, patterns of life. There's limited possibilities of what one can be addicted to. Life is always, well, I would say often, one big temptation towards over-reliance on something that's not being used well. So he makes some interesting statements. I'm going to just read a couple very short statements that he makes, which are helpful to sort of get an orientation here. He says, sin makes us guilty, but disease makes us miserable. Interesting, right? So I may not have been involved with sin, you know, to get me into a situation, but if I'm diseased in some way, I'm certainly miserable. That's true. All right. All sin is equally wrong, but not all sin is equally bad. That's helpful. I want to say that one more time, okay? All sin is equally wrong, but not all sin is equally bad. In other words, if I steal a pen or pencil from you, I've done wrong, all right? But that's less injury than if I burn down your house, right? They're both sin, but obviously, we all agree on this, obviously the impact of the one is quite small. The impact of the other is devastating. They're both sin, but with different degrees of effect. Many people miss this. It's funny, but this is important insight. All right? Now, here's a helpful, this is just 4 words, as we try to nail down, what is sin? Sin is culpable evil. Culpable meaning a person is responsible for doing it. Sin is culpable evil. Let me give you 2 examples to contrast. Okay? If, as a willful human being, I let myself get addicted to drugs and I get deeper into addiction, they do whatever they're doing to me, I'm being victimized, but I own the responsibility because I got myself into it. That's different from a child who is born, right? Let's say mother was a heavy alcohol user, child born with what's called fetal alcohol syndrome. The child's developing brain has been damaged, and there's a lot of mess to come. It just did. We have a lot of this in the U.S. Children who are born basically to drug or alcohol abusing parents. Okay? Now, the child may go on to do bad things. It depends on the child, of course. But the child's born damage or addiction is not sin. That's something that happened because the child wasn't voluntarily involved in it. So we always have to remember that sin, if it's our sin, we mean by it, sin is choices for which I am responsible. Okay? And as he observes, this is Cornelius Plantinga, sin is, as he calls it, self-reproducing. It's like a parasite. All right? It sticks to you and sucks the energy out of you. All right, now, why am I spending time with this? Because, as he points out, all right, and he's getting at this because clearly he's wrestling with this in his own personal life, but also the ministry, academic ministry that he has had. We want to be careful about where we do or don't hold someone responsible for something. All right. So the quick, and frankly, I've heard this so often over the years. These quick statements of so-and-so suffering, he must have done something wrong. No, we don't know that. He may have done something wrong for which God is dealing with him. But there's a lot of possibilities. Remember, somebody out there can do horrible things that injure me, but that doesn't make me a sinner. I'm a sinner for other reasons, but not for that. Many people suffer because of somebody else's sin. Or as I like to put it, the whole picture of sin as it's affected the operations of the world, and the Bible often talks about this, the fabric of the creation having been stretched and twisted and torn, and in the middle of it all, we're affected. We're hurt. And no wonder it seems unjust, and no wonder people struggle with this. By the way, I'm not going to give a firm answer because I've been reading about this and studying this for decades. I'm about 30 years into the study of the subject of Theodicy. I understand a little bit more than I did back then. I don't have a final answer, but I do say this to people. If you believe in a good God, and I do, I don't fully understand this. Now, flip side, some people say, well then, let's just toss the idea of God and have no God. I said, well then you've got even worse problems. Because you've still got to explain how come in this beautiful, amazing world, horrible things are happening. That hasn't solved that. Nobody has the full answer to all of it. Maybe you have the answer.
I don't have the answer, but I do want to say something.
You're welcome to do so.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes in our churches, we don't want to be questioned. We don't want to be asked difficult things. We just want them to accept whatever answers we give. Have I hit a nerve? Yes? Yes. Okay. But in one of my courses, I was taught to think differently about this. Okay? So Dr. Watts said he's been studying this for decades. Okay? God gave every single one of us, you, me, him, brains. Okay. We're to use them. We are to use them. Your congregation members are to use their brains. And when they ask a question, which seems challenging to you, what are they doing? They're using their brains. Right, exactly. They're using their brains. They want you to use your brain. And God gave them to us. Should they be used? Yes. And so, when you start questioning these things, that's not a lack of faith. That's the exact opposite. If I had a lack of faith, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't care to study about God. I wouldn't care to question about God. I wouldn't care to ask those questions. So that's the exact opposite of faith. And we should encourage that decades of study. We should encourage the questions, even though they make us uncomfortable. We should encourage those things because we're encouraging the gifts that God gave us in us and our congregations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, as we start to get into this and narrow this down, all right, is we have developing, and I'm going to erase this in 1 second and put some new points out here, if you will, theology of suffering. Okay? A theology of suffering. And this is designed not to answer or cover every base, but it is designed to say, let's say as much as we can that is helpful and insightful. In other words, even if I don't have a definitive final answer on something to give to someone, and sometimes I don't, what can I offer, okay? What can I offer that may be of help, okay? And I'm going to mention here, because I want to give credit where credit is due. Some things I developed on my own, but if I borrow something from someone, I want to give credit where credit is due. But there is a man who wrote a book a handful of years ago. The book came out in 2 different titles. Interesting, the same book, but 2 totally different titles. The author is a man named John Wenham, W-E-N-H-A-M. And originally this book that was wrestling with this subject was called The Goodness of God, and it was published for a few years, went out of publication, came back with the title, The Enigma of Evil. Same book, identical, everything is the same, but it's wonderful. And I want to tip you some, I've sort of extracted 6 points out of this book that I think were very helpful, and I want to write them, I'll do them in short form up here, okay? It's interesting that Wenham doesn't, well, we could imagine what the world might have operated like had sin not entered the world. Okay, but the best we can do is imagination. Maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong. But the fact is, we've got a prevailing situation, right? As a result of what's described in Genesis 3, namely, human rebellion against God, and then natural consequences coming out of it. All right, so let's start first with a big picture. Again, I want to give credit to Wenham for primarily these points. I'm borrowing his points, all right? So the first is to say, with regard to suffering, specifically, is what he's focusing on, okay? With regard to suffering, it comes about because what I would call the overall situation of sin in our world. Sin is out there, according to Romans chapter 8, the world groans in its pain. How true? How true? All right. We groan when we're in physical pain, many of us. We groan when we are in psychological pain. When I was here first time 11 years ago, right in the middle of the week that I was just getting acquainted with Bridgewell College in Kenya for the first time, we had a murder-suicide in our own church. Husband and wife. Husband murdered the wife and then killed himself. I yelled. I mean, I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. How broken, how horrible, how awful. And remember, I want to emphasize this suffering overall, this sin overall, sometimes does involve our sin, but sometimes it doesn't. Very important to recognize that. Okay, number 2 is great hope, okay? Suffering can be used to our benefit. I never wish pain and anxiety and agony on people. I know it. I don't want it for myself. I don't want it for somebody else. But I can make this observation. Many of us will say, my biggest growth times came out of suffering. All right? Suffering helped me focus. Suffering helped me sort through what really matters. Suffering helped me define my priorities. Suffering drove me to my knees to pray and commune with God more closely than I ever have before. I'll put it simply another way. Not that I particularly suffered, but these were hard times. There are 3 or 4 times in my life when I with good reason, thought, oh, I may be looking right at the end of my life right now. Okay? The first time I was in high school, and a friend and I were held up at knife point by some guys in a gang, and they threatened to hurt us if we didn't give them all our money. We didn't have money much to give, but we did. But I realized he's got a knife. I'm not a fighter. I'm not streetwise. I'm no good at fighting. It's possible. He could very easily have ended my life right there. I was terrified. I was about 15 years old. That was the first time. Second time took place in Africa. Africa's a wonderful place. I was in Liberia between various aspects of their civil war. And we were in a car, we were going out to get a friend from an airport as we were coming back, and in a remote, it was all jungle all around us, and we were pulled over at gunpoint, a bunch of men with machine guns, or young men with machine guns. And was it a real government checkpoint or not? I do not know to this day. I don't know. But I thought to myself, possibly, this is the end of my life. Now, they did not hurt us. They eventually let us go. But I thought if they had ended it, no one would ever know what had happened. They'd throw our bodies in the jungle. No one would ever know what happened. That was the second point. The third time happened about a dozen years ago. And I'd been sick with something, and they were able to treat the sickness, which was mild. But in the course of doing that, the doctor said to me, I hear a sound in your heartbeat. Your heart is sticking. Something's sticking, a valve is sticking there. And I said, oh, okay, what do you think? Why do you think that? He goes, a phrase I'm used to hearing, well, sir, at your age, okay, these things happen. Yeah, great. Okay, I'm in that age now. They did further checking, and the reason they did further checking, it was one of these funny moments, right? The physician says to me, and he asked me all these different disorders. I said, don't have any of them. And then he says, does heart problems run in your family? And I said, sure. On my mother's side, every man dies in his mid-50s. I was in about 55 when I said that. And I laughed. I thought, oh, wait a minute, that's me. Okay. And he goes, well, then we're going to check this out. They found out that I was born with a heart defect. I didn't know it. And I was dying in multiple ways. It was getting ready to blow my aorta apart. The electrical systems were off. The wall of the heart was beginning to thicken. I was going to go into congestive heart failure. And I had no symptoms, but I'm dying 3 different ways with infected heart. And frankly, the doctor was very positive. He said, you had very good success with this surgery that you're going to need. They saw you open, pull you apart, take the heart out of the body. I watched the film, not my own film, but I watched films on YouTube because I wanted to know how they were going to do this. I thought, that's disgusting, but that's what they're going to do. And he said, there's a 5% chance you will not survive the surgery. He said, you're going in good, but a 5% chance. So I scheduled the surgery. And I wondered, and this is the focus I'm describing, okay? I thought it was a wise move to make. Because I thought, if I've got a problem, now's the time to deal with it. I'm not going to wait till the last minute when it's too late. I want to see my grandchildren. I didn't have any grandchildren at the time. But if this gives me a chance to live, I want to serve God. I want to live. I want to serve God. I want to possibly see grandchildren. That was one of the biggest things in my mind. Surgery went very, very well, by the way. There were no complications. Brilliant surgery. And that was the third time I thought, just maybe, my life was over. Now, here's my point, and why I'm telling you this story, is I didn't suffer in the way many people suffer in those circumstances, but facing the awful, whatever the awful is, has a way of making you sure you're trying to do what you really want to do. All right? It just does, the way it does it. So it can be used to our benefit. Not that we want to suffer or want somebody else to suffer, but there are many, many ways God will use it to our benefit and help focus us in good ways. Number 3, suffering keeps us realistic about life. And when I say keeps us realistic, what I mean by that is when things are running smoothly, oh, this is wonderful, you found that, thank you. Did you have this like here, or?
No, we just got now.
You just got it now?
Yeah.
That's wonderful, thank you so much.
Enjoy.
My back has been hurting. This is the kind of thing I like to lecture from when I can. So I'm going to be sort of up and down from this. That's okay. You'll still be able to hear me and see me. I think okay. So this is just good for comfort. So anyway, keep us realistic about life. When things are going smoothly, it's tempting to say, well, they're going smoothly because I'm really good at what I do. They're going smoothly because, God really knows I'm a good guy. We're tempted to think these kinds of ways. Whereas suffering says, look, this is the world the way it is right now. And it's messed up. And it's a beautiful world, and it's messed up in horrible ways. And we're not free. We're looking for the day when we're going to be free from it, right? We're looking for that day when God will bring all things together, new heavens, new earth. I want that day. But we're not there yet, and this keeps reminding us that fact. All right? So, and I like to ask this question. I'll ask this question of you. This is a question you can answer to yourself. I ask this of my young students. I say to them, I want you to take a moment to imagine somebody you know, and during your life, that somebody has had a major impact on you, positive, major impact on you. They've done something for you that has just made your life that much better. Find it in your mind. Find who that person is. By the way, I can list a number of people like that. And then I'm going to ask a question about that person that was helpful. I said, I'm willing to guess the person who did such good for you in their own life got broken somewhere. Okay? Got broken somewhere. And it's not that you wish for brokenness, but when it happens, and usually it happens surprisingly, when it happens, then you say, okay, what am I going to do with this? And some people choose to become bitter. Pause for just a second. I bet you know not only people who are very good to you and influence you positively, but I bet you can also in your mind say, there are some people out there who, when they went through difficulty, they are, for life now, they're angry, nasty people. That's a possibility. Some people respond that way. We don't have to, but some do. So it helps keep us realistic and hopefully, in a way that is true to the fact of this world that we have, okay? But also true to the fact this is temporary. This is, by the way, speaking of being temporary, the other day I was listening to some folks talking, and one of them talked about being he's doing a job as an interim pastor, okay? Meaning there was a main pastor here, there was someone here, and they did a short period of service in the middle as an interim. And the other person said, we are all interim people, right? There's people went before us, and there's people coming after us. We're coming and going. We're all interim, right? Whether you live a short life or a long one, whether you have a short period of service or a long one, we're all interims, all of us, okay? God's pleased to use us, that's the good news. But none of us is indisposable. We're all replaceable, aren't we? Yeah, same with that. Okay, that's number 3. Number 4, and again, thanks to John Lennon for help on this, suffering keeps our eyes focused on the redemption that is to come. It keeps us looking forward to redemption. And I'm going to say this is a balance. Okay, this is a balance. Because on the one hand, a life that is worth living has its eyes right now where I am and on the ground. Practical, here I am. Got a hand on myself now. But We have a day that the Bible also says is coming, we don't know when all things are going to be made right. And where clarification on much that we have today is going to come, but it's got to come down the road. All right? Looking for the day of redemption. And so, we operate now both with a view to what makes things good now and what is yet to come. I'm going to quote a man. This man just passed away a couple of weeks ago. I like to give credit, as many other people do. He was my systematic theology professor in seminary many, many years ago. Wayne Spear was his name, a lifelong pastor and a man of great godliness and balance. And I have many, many Spear quotes in my mind that I've heard over the years, and they're like jewels that I took with me. And here's one of his brief quotes. He said, "The Christian life is a balancing act." In many, many ways, Christian life is a balancing act. Here's one of the balances. Keeping my eyes on eternity, but also on the present. Many other balances. Christian life is a balancing act. And suffering has a role in that. Because we're faced with the need to live and act now. At the same time, we realize the day is coming when we're going to be clear on why things happen. As the Bible puts it, we'll see God face to face. Okay? So it has a role in helping us, hopefully helping us, find that balance by keeping us looking forward at the same time we're focused on the present. Okay. Number 5, suffering teaches us to appreciate what we have. And when I say appreciate what we have, yes, I am thinking about things, but I'm thinking about everything, not just the things that are in our life that we're given, but the opportunities and the skills, the friends, the circumstances. Right? I'm going to tell you a little story. This is a fascinating book. Came out some years ago by a woman whose name, at the moment, is on my mind, but the book is called Life and Death in Shanghai. Obviously about a Chinese woman. And I was interested in this because when I was a boy, briefly, I lived in Hong Kong, when Hong Kong was still under British mandate. And of course, since then, it's become part of mainland China. But administratively, it was part of British mandate at the time. And there were some pretty tough political things happening in China at the time I was living in Hong Kong. And China was going through what was called a cultural revolution, which was just some bizarre things going on, and so many people were hurt. Not the communist revolution, but the cultural revolution, like a revolution within a revolution. Anyway, she was one of the people who suffered horribly in the cultural revolution because she was wealthy. Now, her husband had become wealthy in business. He died, but she still had his wealth. And her house was raided, and all the things in her home were smashed, and she was put in solitary confinement for something like 8 years. On the charges never being specified, but she knew why. It's because she was wealthy. That was her crime, was wealth. Interesting crime, isn't it? Anyway, she walked the edge of death for those 8 years. She had almost no food. She would get one small bowl of rice per day. That's it. That's all she had to live on. Occasionally a slice of vegetable, something like that. Maybe a rotten little fish was thrown in there, she said. Anyway, here's what's interesting. You know what she did with that bowl of rice? That's all she had to sustain herself. She would sit down in her cell, which had a bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling, a skinny little window through which she could at least tell if it was daylight or night outside, a bare piece of wood that was her bed, a little rickety chair. So what did she do when her food came, which was barely enough to live on? This is her. This is a big story. She said she would take that bowl of rice, and she would take the grains of rice one at a time, and she would line the perimeter of the table with the rice grains, and then she would count them, how many grains she had that day. Okay? And then she'd eat them. Okay? But it was her way of saying, this is horrible. Right? It is horrible. She nearly died for obvious reasons. But this is what she did have. Now, I trust none of us ever reach that point. Most of us will never reach that point in life. But here was someone who had so precious little, but her orientation was, okay, I've got this much. I'll find a way to work with it. By the way, she was eventually released, a shell of a broken woman. She moved to the United States and lived out the rest of her life in the United States. And I believe a happier life. That was the situation. So keeping appreciative of what we do have. May I pause and have you do something to yourself for just a minute? All right? And this is something I do with my people at church, okay? In various settings, I say, think about where you are, the home you live in, whatever family structures you have. Some of you have much, some of you have little. Some of you have happy circumstances, some of you have unhappy circumstances. Think of the friends that are in your circle. Think of the things you own, your clothing, your household goods. Whatever kind of transportation you rely on, given you. All right? Think of the food that you live on, whatever type it is, wherever it comes from. Just pause. Take in all that God has given you. And yes, you can say, there are many people that have a lot more than I do. All of us can say, I know tons of people have a lot more than I do. And guess what? There's also lots of people who have a lot less. Okay? A wise person pauses and even under difficulty can say, I need to keep my orientation in such a way that I appreciate what I have. By the way, an interesting writer, Old Testament theologian, has said the Psalms are typically ones that either orient us, they help us sort of keep our minds straight in the midst of messy life and world. Some of them are Psalms of disorientation. Things are broken and the psalmist doesn't know what to say. My God, why did you forsake me? Fair question. And then there are Psalms that involve reorientation. Right? I was broken, and I saw the wealthy, and I realized they have all this stuff, and I could have been tempted to sin. Right? But then God kept me on the right path. And this is my life. I'm going to guess this is your life, too. Times of one where we're oriented well, broken, disoriented. Suffering disorients us. It does. And then maybe, just maybe, thank God, find a way to be reoriented. So it helps us in that regard. I've always been struck by the story of that woman. Sixth and finally, I'm going to write something down, but then I want to tell you an angle before I actually sort of summarize it, okay? I have asked a question, but long before I was reading these books on suffering. I've asked a question, apparently a number of other people have asked, and I think it's a good question. Could God have redeemed us not by sending his son to die for us? Could God have redeemed us in some other method? Okay? I don't know what, I'm not here to suggest other methods. I'm just saying it's a question. Could God have bought us at some other price other than sending Jesus, his son? In my own mind, I'm not speaking for you, I'm saying in my own mind, I've gone back and forth. On the one hand, I'm saying to myself, but he tells us life is redeemed by means of blood, and sending his son is innocent blood. So I could make an argument that no, he had to do it this way. Okay? But I could also say, but wait a minute, God's character and abilities are such he can do within the bounds of what is consistent with his whole and good nature. He can do anything he wants. So he could have found some other method. Now, I don't have a final answer to this question, but I do have point number 6. Statement of fact.
Can I make a comment on that question?
Oh, on the question? Sure, before I come back to that, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to make sure you use this for clarity. There we go.
So, remember how I said that if we are training our children, we speak to them in a language that they can understand and something they can comprehend. So when you're contemplating that question, you have to think about the culture that God was working in and whom he was talking to. So there was a culture of sacrifice already. Okay? So if you sinned, what did you do? What did the Jews do? They offered a sacrifice to atone for their sins. That was the culture within he was working. Okay? So he was speaking a language that that the people would understand. So that's what he was working in. Of course, God could do anything he wants. Okay? But God meets us where we're at. Just like we're supposed to meet our congregation members where they're at and bring them up, God meets us where we're at in a language we can understand and things we can comprehend.
Yep. So,
Excuse. Number 6, the first name I don't know. The first one.
Jesus.
Huh?
Jesus' redemption.
Jesus' redemption. Thank you. I still have a memory. I was 9 years old, in 4th grade. I was sitting at my desk. We all were writing assignments. My teacher was a teacher I loved. His name was Mr. Richardson. And he was a tall, skinny, I think he was a Scotsman. And he looks down at my awful handwriting. He just goes, he walks away. Never forget that. Some things cannot be redeemed. That's one of them. Anyway, fact. Jesus' redemption did come through suffering. Just saying the fact. Whether God could or couldn't do it else, I think he could have, but the fact is that's the way he did it. He bought us at a price that was horrible, bloody and awful. Now, what does Jesus say? You know this, right? The disciple is not above the master. So the kinds of experiences he is having, especially in his day-to-day ministry, we should be able to say, okay, these things happened with Jesus. To some degree, they're going to be our experiences as well. We're not somehow better than him. And I remind myself that, especially at times when my ministry, some aspect of my ministry, has not been successful. Okay? If you pastored even just a couple of years, you have already had at least one experience, maybe many, where you thought, I put in my best efforts, and I really loved people, I was doing the right thing, and still, it didn't help. Am I correct?
Yes.
At that moment, I'll try and speak, I also can try and speak for all of us, but you can add if you want. We feel like failures. We feel that somehow God has been unjust. I do. Just briefly, I get over it. But my feeling is, I committed myself to these people. I'm pouring out my efforts for them. And look at what happened. That seems so unfair. Please, take this, pass this back. I'll pass it back. Please add to this. Please do.
I've met some Christians who went through suffering and they project their pain to other people. What would be the problem? And they are Christians. Instead of dealing with it, they project the pain to other people.
They do. Can I give a version of that? In projecting, they sometimes cause bitterness. They train other people to be bitter. I'm bitter, so therefore you should be bitter. Is that the kind of thing you're describing?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah. By the way, sometimes parents do this to their children. Right? Parents can raise their children to be resentful and bitter because the children are easy targets. Now, you weren't asking me to answer the question on how to stop that, are you? Because I don't know.
What? How to stop that?
Go ahead, you have wisdom. How to stop? Okay, we've got the voice from afar here.
So what are we stopping again?
So someone who has projected their pain on other people and trained them to be bitter.
So we will address this more in the class next week, but trauma begets trauma.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm going to use Esther as an example of this. Okay? Esther is a heroine, isn't she? She saved her people. Okay? Now, this is a sort of a taste of what we're going to do next week. But Esther was a victim of trauma. She was orphaned. That's trauma. She lost her parents. She was exiled from her country and living in Babylon. Okay? So she...
Yeah, Persia, excuse me.
Persia. Okay. So she's in exile. Second trauma. Okay? She has to deny her heritage. You're Kenyan, right? What if I told you you couldn't proclaim that you were Kenyan? You had to hide that. Yes. You have to deny it, and you have to change your name so you don't sound Kenyan. That would be bad. Okay? So these are the things that Esther's experiencing. Or should I say Hadassah? Okay? She's scooped up with all the young, beautiful women, and she's groomed for months for a one-night stand with King Xerxes. Isn't that traumatic? Then she has to face death by trying to get an audience with the king to save her people. Okay? Trauma again. Now, after this is all over, what does she order? What does she ask of the king? Who remembers? She asks for the beheading of Haman and his sons, right? Okay. More trauma. You don't think their wives and their children were traumatized by that? Trauma begets trauma. So when somebody is projecting onto to you, the first thing we should be asking is, where's their hurt? Are we going to turn around and dish that back and beget more trauma or beget more hurt? So when we provide pastoral care, we have to tell ourselves and we have to know that what they're projecting says far more about them than it does about us. Okay? And so we can't own that for them. And we have to meet them where they're at. And we have to attempt. Now, if they don't want to change it, there's nothing we can do. We can pray for them. We can maybe refer them to somebody else. I'm not the best counselor for every population. Okay? So maybe somebody else would be more effective than me. But when we have that projection, we have to understand where it comes from, and that hurt begets more hurt. And we have to decide. So this will take me to one more thing. Generational sin. Okay? God doesn't curse our children for what we do. We do. Okay? If I teach my children to be anxious because I'm anxious, I'm generationally causing them to not trust in God and rely on their own anxiety. If I teach them to be bitter, that's generational sin. Those criminogenic needs that are passed down, that's generational sin. Okay? So that's why we have to challenge ourselves and our children to say, what was good, what do I keep, and what can I improve on? And when your children start raising children, if they do something a little different than you, maybe you can say, they're taking what was good and they're trying to improve instead of being offended by it. Does that help? Does that help?
I think so. Yeah. By the way, I do have a thought. It took me a moment to come to this, because I have faced what you described, is when someone is distributing their suffering to other people and their responses, though I can't control somebody else's lifestyle. They live it. It's their life somehow. But I sometimes get to ask a strategic question or two. So I can say to someone, do you know that if you make choices and patterns this way, they often end up this way? All right? If you distribute your pain to other people, do you realize you will cause them hurt that they originally didn't have? If you distribute your pain to other people, you may embitter them. If you distribute your pain to other people, you may end up finding that down the road your only friends are bitter people.
Or none.
Or none at all. You can end up life, you could. I don't say what will happen. I can't predict the future. By the way, to tell you how bad I am at predicting the future, in the year 2000, when COVID started to hit, I said to my friends in America, I said, don't worry about it. This is going to be like Ebola in America, not Ebola in Africa. Ebola in America barely touched America. I said, it's going to come and go. Give it a couple weeks. Oh, was I wrong? Oh, my goodness. Okay, so I can't predict. I'm going to be careful not to predict someone's life, but say, look, based on the wisdom literature, when you make certain patterns of choices, they tend to have certain results. They tend. I can't say for sure, but they tend that way. That's the beauty of the wisdom literature. It's natural consequences that often come about. And I say to someone, I'm going to give you a specific example, okay? This is very personal, and we're not personal to me, but to somebody else who you don't know who the person is. But I was approached by a good church-related friend many years ago. He had been married for about 10 to 15 years. I don't remember exactly, but they've been married a while. And during the course of those 10 or 15 years, within a matter of a short time, right after they were married, the wife started to become extremely critical of her husband. She just went at him with a battle axe, and metaphorically speaking. And she refused to have any intimate relations with him for years and years and years. Okay? And I knew both of them. I knew him a little bit better than I knew her, but I knew both of them. And I knew that he was someone who really, he was trying to be a good husband and felt like he was failing. She was an absolutely beautiful, beautiful woman. And one day, I saw her walking down the street, and I thought, I think I'm going to take a risk here. And as she was walking, I sort of walked alongside her. I said, can I just chat with you for a few minutes as you walk? She goes, okay. And I said, I want you to know, your husband poured out his heart to me recently. And I said, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I don't know all the circumstances. But it sounds like things are pretty strained between the two. She said, she agreed. She affirmed everything her husband said. There was no disagreement on the raw facts. And the best I could say to her is, whatever's going into you making these kinds of choices, you need to know that the natural effect is you're going to isolate your husband. You isolate your husband when he says he loves you, right? You isolate the people who love you, you're going to have no other friends. Now, they had a few years where things went a little bit better, and interestingly, she got pregnant, and they have some kids, and then she went back to her old ways again. And the next couple decades were like the first one. It's just, bitter, angry, contemptuous, nothing close, and she's been told you, go get whatever the issues are. It's not mine to get into, but find someone who can help with whatever goes into what is leading you to be this way. And I'm sad to say, she never changed. And she's now living a life as a single woman, estranged from her kids, estranged. She didn't have any friends to begin with. The natural consequences of the ways in which she has dealt with her family, but also other friends, is what she's living with now. Wisdom literature says, be smart. Look at the way the world works. Right? You hurt people, it's going to have effects. Not hurt yourself, but you're going to have other effects. So, but yeah, people that distribute, that's exactly the word, distribute. That's exactly what certain people do. By the way, can I ask you, this is an opinion question. Do you think women or men are more likely to distribute, or do you think it's done by both men and women? It's an opinion question. I'm just curious what you think. Both. Both. Yeah, I think both. I think I've seen both. Both men and women. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. So let me go back to just more than one led into this. So let's take a moment. Again, you can think of this for yourself, because I think all of you, or nearly all of you, are involved in various kinds of ministries. So when you have hit this point where you were helping whomever in whatever way, and things fell apart, okay, and you were kind of taken back, I can't believe what I thought was going to be a successful relationship. It didn't happen. The ministry I thought we were doing so well fell apart. The building that I thought we were doing, building up of good things, collapsed. And you feel like a failure. You feel isolated. Because only so many people will understand what you're feeling. There are others, but only so many will understand what you're feeling. Okay? This is a good time to ask, who can you entrust yourself to? Because each person has to come up with their own answer. I had to reshuffle my list. Because there was a point in my life where if you'd asked me, who can I entrust myself? I could have given you names. Okay? And I went through some period of crisis, and I thought, oh, I thought I could trust this person. No, he disappeared. No, this person gave me bad advice. No, this person didn't care. This person was too busy. So I've taken some people off the list, but then I was able to add some others onto the list. Thank God. All right? And I don't go about, I don't pour out my heart to everyone. I don't do that. But there are different people that I trust. All right? Mostly, I shouldn't say mostly, many of them are fellow pastors. But some of them are not. Many of them are men. A couple of them are women. I know a number of women who have incredibly wise and judicious insight. And I know if I open up a problem, they're going to have something thoughtful to contribute. But you ought to ask yourself, who do you trust? And who will you entrust yourself? Or now again, to stop this, are you so isolated and alone, you try to carry everything by yourself? And some people are like that. So figure out this, because if you are one of those strong, independent people, you haven't done the worst sin, I know that, but you're vulnerable. But you're vulnerable. Because you get carved out of the fellowship of mutual support and respect. You have to decide that. What I'd like to do is take a break, okay? And then I want to continue this conversation. I want to give you 15 minutes to decide how you want to answer a question. I'm going to come back to you, okay? I'm going to erase the board on break. I'm going to ask you a question because I want to get oriented to your world, all right? We said two cultures, Western, African, much in common because people are people, but there are some significant differences as well. I want to hear from you. What are the kinds of topics and challenges that pastors face the most in the zone of needing to counsel people? Would you think about that for your break time? Come back. We'll break. Let's start promptly at 3 o'clock, and we'll go for 1 hour to conclude. Okay? See you then. Thank you.